On a 2021 Ford Bronco suspension, in detail, let's look at some of this. Specifics about this suspension. Now, Ford hasn't released all of the new Bronco suspension details that we'd like to see, but we can learn enough to come away with impress. And I mean really impress. Now they can have my $100 deposit right now. I'm saying this because they seem to hit the target smack in the middle of the off-roader's head, or what you call a conundrum. My personal conundrum, at least, should I buy a Jeep Wrangler or Toyota 4Runner? I punted and somehow ended up with one of each. If the Bronco had been available earlier, it would not have been the predicament. It would have been a whole different predicament. Because the Ford Bronco is just awesome, folks. Actually, I would have dived into the Ford Bronco. At one point, I was thinking about getting the Wrangler, but I don't know. I just stopped because the one I liked was spec'd at $69,000. So you had to take a step back because that's a lot of money to dash out for an off-roader. But this baby, it's just awesome, folks. Now what Ford has come up with is what would have been a sweet spot. An open-air capable off-roader, but with a full width cabin, an independent front suspension to make it more livable on the road. And presumably, because I haven't, driven one, on a bone jarring type of road or trail, which a lot of people will love to explore. And I'll be the first to admit, I'm not a double black diamond thrillist. That said, the useful Rubicon off-road tools are available, but I also see more than a little of the fabled forbidden Ranger Raptor in the new Bronco too. Now the first thing that jumped out at us was the track width of the suspension. It's much wider than a Ford Ranger, 61.4 inches. That we know, the Bronco Wildtrak has a track width of 66.9 inches, which is a scant 0.4 inches narrower than the Ranger Raptor. That's what we don't get here. But track width numbers don't tell the whole story, because they are measured at the middle of the tread. The 35-inch tires, for example, that come on a Wildtrak is 315 millimeters wide, instead of the small Raptor, 285 millimeters. So the Bronco Wildtrak is in fact slightly broader than the Ranger Raptor, from the tire sidewall to the tire sidewall. That can make a hell of a difference. Now, if talk makes you worry about the narrow trails, know that the Badlands and the rest have a track width of 65 inches. That's 1.8 inches broader than a 4Runner. But the Bronco's tighter body sculpting makes the Badlands just a half-inch wider overall than a Toyota. The new Ford tires simply fill out its wheel wells better, which is nice. You get the on-road benefits and the good looks of a wider track without much increase in trail damage. Dangers, that is, if we can say peril. Now, fleeting images of the Bronco bare chassis hints at why it has much of a wide stance. The shots clearly show aluminum upper and lower control arms, but they also show a more robust structure where the upper shock mounts meets the inner pivot of the upper control arm. Comparing that to similar images taken as the Ranger Raptor introduction, I could easily believe that the frame side suspension mounting points are the same. It's certainly not lifted from the normal Ranger as you would think. But this is definitely nice, folks. The control arms don't look to be a direct carryover, but here it's hard to be certain. The upper one might be, but the stabilizer bar positioning and the link routing looks very different in a way that suggests that the Bronco's knuckles and lower control arm will be unique. This is probably due to the space needed to package the new disconnectable front stabilizer bar, but that's a guess. And let's just take a look at this. The stabilizer bar, the position of the link, and the routing looks very different, in a way to suggest that the Bronco's knuckles and the lower control arm will be unique. This is probably due to the space needed to package the new disconnectable front stabilizer bar. As you can see, the front stabilizer bar is there, right in black, right here, as you can see. This is the disconnect. Now, the disconnecting front stabilizer bar, it looks awesome. And as people would say, it's rad. Now, Ford says the stabilizer bar can be connected and disconnected under load, and that should make it faster acting than the one that's fitted to the Jeep Rubicon. We've all seen the sway bar status light flash in a Jeep as it waits until the truck is on a flat enough surface before the operation can be completed. But what Ford is excuse me, is suggesting that such delays will be short-lived to non-existence in a Bronco. This is called awesome engineering, folks. On the fly. Ford has really thought about this. As you see, they've been working on this for a long period of time. Now, with that said, the Badlands 4-door estimated maximum ramp travel index scores at 620 points. With the bar disconnected, it's quite a bit better than a KDSS equipped 4Runner that we measured on the ramp and that you can also measure. We have a feeling that a Wrangler Rubicon Unlimited will score better, but the estimated Bronco Badlands number is still quite solid. And this right here is the front and the rear locking differential options. And boy, don't that look awesome. Just take a look at that. What engineering. Now the Wildtraks in the Badlands come with the front and rear lockable differentials. And they're easy to add to any other trim by adding the Sasquatch package. But there's more to them than their seemingly wide availability. Ford tells us that a driver can choose to lock the rear one in 2 high mode, and that the front one can be locked by itself in 4 low mode. Normally, factory installed front differentials are lockable only after the rear one is locked first, but the Bronco is set up to offer a more driver control oriented interface. Now the high performance off-road stability control, or suspension, as known as HOSS, H-O-S-S, comes on a Wildtrak in the Badlands. And these are also available on any other trim. If you buy a Sasquatch package, the use of the Bilstein shocks is a departure from the Fox shocks used on the Range Raptor, but I wouldn't read too much into that. Now the Bronco Bilsteins have remote reservoirs that increase oil volume for cooler running, and they also have internal hydraulic end stops that give them the position sensitive damping. They'll be soft in the middle of the travel and firm up to the end to soak up the big hits with less chance of bottoming or topping out. The end stop concept is similar to what you'll find on the early TRD Toyota Tundra, known as the TRD Pro Tundra. But that truck, Bilstein's, didn't have the additional benefit of the remote reservoirs. If anything, the rear half of the Bronco suspension looks more like a Ranger Raptor than the front. The Ranger Raptor differs from all the other Rangers because it uses coil springs rear suspension, and that truck seems to be piloting a new rear configuration that will appear elsewhere. The Bronco seems to be the first use of the suspension layout on these shores. Now both have a solid rear axle that's located by 4 trailing links, and they both use a coilover rear spring damper configuration. Now we're not seeing any appreciable difference here, where the upper end and the spring shock mounts to the frame, and the lower trailing links looks mighty similar too. The difference comes down to lateral control, and it's a clear departure. The Ranger Raptor uses a Watts linkage, while the Bronco uses the more familiar and undoubtedly less costly lateral panhard rod. The Broncos will be offered with tires of 4 diameters, 30, 32, 33, and 35 inches. With the net, the 32-inch tire is available in 3 distinctly different sizes. That adds up to 6 different tire sizes in all. Along with that, there are also a 4 axle ratio, 3.73 and a 4.27 and 4.46 and a 4.70 to 1. Generally speaking, axle ratios will be matched up with the tire diameter to keep the effective overall gearing similar. But the presence of both an automatic and a manual transmission mean it's not as simple as that. Or it's not quite simple. Now, if those ratios sound generally high, these tire diameters are generally large, and this vehicle will have a 10-speed automatic transmission with a highly overdriven 0.646 to 1 top gear. The new 7-speed manual is right in the same ballpark with a 0.636 to 1 cruiser gear. Of course, 7 gear is really 6, because second is really first. That's because they're calling the first gear the crawler gear, a name that it truly deserves. The 6.588 to 1 ratio won't be useful in the daily driving, folks. Only off-road when you're doing some rock crawling. Now, because of that creepy crawly gear, Ford is touting a mighty 94.75 to 1 crawl ratio. Now, when the manual transmission is paired with the 4.7 to 1 axle ratio, the combination seems to be available on the Badlands with 33-inch tires, which in our minds add up to an uncommonly low trail walking speed at idle. Now, the Badlands is to Rubicon as Wildtrak is to the Mojave. Now, looking at the equipment, it seems to us that the Badlands is the one to get if you're a Rubicon person. And the Wildtrak is more akin to what Jeep Wrangler Mojave would be if they even got around to building one. There's also the first edition, of course, but let's set aside that limited launch model. Because hey, only 7,000 people get those. Now, our eyes is on the Badlands. It's the only one with the disconnectable front stabilizer bar, but it also has the front and the rear locking differentials. It has the most suspension travel by far, and it will absolutely be the one that travels farthest up the flat's index ramp. I also like the fact that the Badlands has that Haas Bilstein suspension. It comes with a higher grade of electromechanical transfer case that has a lower 3.06 to 1 low range ratio. But I wouldn't have lost sleep over that, even if I didn't, because the base electronic shift on the fly, known as ESOF, transfer case has a 2.72 to 1, which isn't terribly far off. It's nothing like the 4 to 1 versus the 2.72 to 1 situation over at Jeep. Now the Wildtrak was described to be are described by a Ford representative as a desert runner. And that's what we've seen in all the publications. The Wildtrak is the desert runner. And a lot of that has to do with the bunker's 35-inch tires. But we're not convinced that the bigger tires is the way to go. But the tire size made it necessary to limit the suspension travel and forego the disconnectable stabilizer bars on the 35-incher to make sure that they don't rub. Now this version will not be the RT one standout of the bunch, but it will be able to get itself out of the most trouble because of its front and rear lockers. Still, the suspension flex flew snob, so we'll stick to the Badlands. Because if you like suspension, you know, the Badlands is the way to go. It's longer suspension travel, the disconnectable front stabilizer bars, the 33-inch tires that makes those workable. Ford hasn't released the approach, departure, and ground clearance that specifically apply to the Badlands, but they'll be closer to the Wildtrak. In that spectrum, an estimated 10.5 inches for the Badlands ground clearance, but considering it's a smaller tire radius and that it's 1 inch off the Wildtrak ground clearance figures. Now that puts us smack in the ballpark of the Rubicon and much better than the 4Runner. And that's exactly what we're seeing up and down the preliminary Bronco spec sheet. This is a vehicle that combines attributes of the Jeep Wrangler and the Toyota 4Runner into one vehicle. And we're all in it, folks. The superior EcoBoost engine, the new Sync 4 information system. You know, just give them the $100 because this is an awesome SUV, folks. Guys, thanks for watching. Remember, like and subscribe and have an awesome day.
If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more interesting videos.